Welcome everyone to the webinar tonight. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and live and recognise their continuing connection to the land, water and community. We pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. We'll start now with just a bit of housekeeping for the evening. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation, so please put all these questions in the chat function, which we will monitor throughout the session. The webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on the College of Surgeons website, and we will also make contact details available for the speaker on the website. I'd like to now introduce our speaker for tonight, Daniel McCow. He has over 15 years of experience in cybersecurity, intelligence and risk management developed across the Office of National Assessments, Australian Federal Police and the Australian Communications and Media Authority. Most recently, Daniel served as an executive advisor to the Commonwealth Bank's inaugural Chief Information Security Officer. In this role, Daniel has helped successfully implement Australia's largest corporate cybersecurity uplift program to the Commonwealth Bank's Digital Protection Group. Daniel was also a key contributor to the Australian Government's recent National Cybersecurity Review and served on the expert committee of the Victorian Government's Cybersecurity Strategy Group. Tonight, Daniel will be providing a behind-the-curtain look at the cyber threat environment, dark web and why medical industry is a target. He will share live case studies and what trends you need to know about and simple takeaways to help you ward against cyber attack. So without further ado, I will introduce Daniel.
Thanks, David. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight. It is a late start, so I'm going to probably try and speak for about 40-45 minutes. Please, I know there is a chat function, so please make your questions known as we go through. And if there's any issues with the slides or anything, you can let me know as well. But like I said, it's really nice to be here. And we'll kick off and talk about all things cybersecurity. So I'm going to talk about the cyber threat environment in 2020, how it's been changing, how it continues to evolve. We're going to take a peek into the dark web. We're not going to stay for too long. We can get carried away. I can do a whole session on the dark web if we want. I can definitely come back and do more, but we're going to have a peek in the dark web. And that will be to I guess to elucidate and to show you the primary forum that a lot of cyber criminals are operating on and how they use, trade and sell all sorts of information and services. I'm going to talk about then some general trends, a couple of case studies when it comes to the healthcare sector and what you guys do, and also some of my worries and some of the things that I hear in my practice. So like David said, that was a very nice introduction. I think I wrote that. So I've been working in the field for about 15 years now, and for about the past 6 or 7 years, I've been consulting to a number of large Australian companies when it comes to cybersecurity strategy. I'm going to leave you guys hopefully with some takeaways as well, some simple practical steps, the 3 Ps as I speak to them about cybersecurity resilience. Interesting statistic to start things off there. This is in the post sort of COVID world, guys, is that cyber attacks have increased by a factor of about 150% since the start of 2020. And that's particularly the sort of attacks that we've seen increase have been phishing attacks. It's been trying to compromise healthcare systems with ransomware. And you can see that's been a marked increase since the beginning of 2020. Look, we're probably going to talk about quite a bit of the bad tonight. But before we did, I always like in all of my sessions just to ask people to just pause and just I guess reflect on how much our world has changed and how digitized our world has become. The statistics here, back in 2000, now believe it or not, this morning was the 20th anniversary of the lighting of the flame at the Sydney 2000 Olympics. And back then, there was only about 7% of the world's population was connected to the internet in some form. Sure, it was dial-up, it was pretty slow. As of a couple of years ago now, you're looking at 2/3 of the world's population being connected online. And that's not just, I should say, having internet connection. There's also been a real increase in the speed of those connections and the mobility of those connections as well. That's mainly powered through technologies like 4G and 5G. About 1 trillion devices is the estimate is going to be connected to the internet through something that we call the Internet of Things by 2022. And that's all manner of devices. And the devices are becoming smaller, they're becoming smarter. It's everything like fitness trackers. So if you have a Fitbit or a Garmin was at the end of a successful cybersecurity hack only a couple of weeks ago. It was a ransomware incident. A smart fridge, smart home devices, smart light bulbs, all manner of things are being connected. And increasingly in the next 5 to 10 years, I guess you're going to see an explosion of these type of devices as well. You'll be seeing more wearables, more medical devices, more temporary medical devices will be connected. So there's going to be a lot more out there. And this statistic I always find really fascinating is that you're looking at about 90% of all the data that's ever been created in the whole history of humanity has been created in the last 2 years. That statistic always blows my mind, because you think about the other two elements feeding into that. You've got a lot more things, a lot more people connected. 2, a lot more things connected. And 3, there's a lot more stuff out there. So that makes it a very, I guess, appetizing mix for a range of cyber adversaries or cyber criminals. And I just wanted to drill down a little bit into what this all means in the digital revolution for healthcare. You're probably seeing it in your day-to-day work. You're seeing more and more things like on-demand healthcare, and that's certainly been spurred on by COVID-19 with the move to a lot more telehealth consultations and whatnot. Big data insights. So what can we learn from all the stuff that's being collected, all that information that's being generated, and how can we apply that in the healthcare setting? What does that mean? You'll probably see a move towards more virtual reality when the technology becomes smaller and actually wearable for things like training. Like I mentioned, there'll be a dive towards more wearable devices that will be able to feed in that information to the internet and also to patient management systems and the like. And then there's also artificial intelligence, which is going to drive, I think, much more personalized outcomes for patients, and likewise much more personalized outcomes for us right across the internet and how we connect. Guys, it is probably no surprise to any of you that there is a lot of money in cybercrime. It is absolutely big business. And, this isn't a disparaging remark when it comes to some of my former colleagues in the federal police or in police forces, but it is a very difficult crime to stop. It's a very difficult crime to police. It's a very difficult crime to attribute to certain people and then to get a successful prosecution. Not only that, nearly all organisations say that attacks are becoming more sophisticated. That might be a little bit trite to observe, but it's certainly true. They're becoming more sophisticated in scope, scale and size. They estimate the cost to the global economy is probably about $6 trillion. That's the worldwide cost or impact of cybercrime on the global economy. That's more than the trade in illicit drugs. It can be quite a profitable undertaking for criminals. We're going to have a look in the dark web in a couple of minutes, and the average kind of salary is about $230,000. This is for a pretty low-level person operating the dark web. That's illicit funds, I might say. The ACSC, that's the Australian Cyber Security Centre, that's the government's cybersecurity body in Canberra. They receive a report of a significant cybercrime incident in Australia now every 10 minutes. This statistic varies, guys, but it can take up to a day for smaller businesses to respond appropriately to a cyber attack. What's concerning for me is that only about 1 in every 3 of Australian businesses are continuously backing up their systems data. Now, it's a really easy thing to do, increasingly with more cloud type technologies becoming available, setting automated backups, but it is a really important protection against a range of cyber threats, including ransomware. So if you're continuously backing up your data, that's something that it becomes quite easy then if you have a system that's infected to roll back to that data, and you might only lose a day or so rather than having to pay a ransom. And unfortunately, it just takes one person to be duped. It's my favourite stat. One person to open an email, one person to click on a link, or one person to download something that they shouldn't, and then that is an attack, a successful attack vector into an organisation. And I will talk about an insurer client of mine and an incident that they managed to trace back to one person. So, I think it might be interesting. You probably hear a lot about cybercrime. Who's behind this? Who's undertaking these activities? What do they look like? Well, first thing, this might sound a little bit odd. There's traditional gangs, and these are traditional gangs of cyber criminal elements. Traditionally, if we were to look back 10 or so years ago, the main players here were based out of Eastern Europe, so the former Soviet blocs, where a lot of these traditional gangs sprouted up, and that came from really an oversupply of people who had learned programming and then couldn't put the skills to gainful employ, so decided to turn to criminal activities. The second one, guys, is something you've probably heard a lot about recently. You're going to hear a lot about it more and more, is state-sponsored attackers. So that's attackers that are either directly or indirectly supported by the state. No surprises who the big players are here. Putting aside, by the way, I might point out the US, the UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, who do their own state-sponsored attacking. The big players here are the usual suspects when it comes to geopolitics at the moment. So the Chinese are very adept at this, and there's been a lot of debate and conjuncture about certain activities of the Chinese government in Australia over the last couple of days, and also over the last couple of months with what we call the copy and paste compromises. Another big player is, of course, Russia. Been at this for a long time. The Russians, they've been honing their skills, and they're very successful in a range of activities. But there are other players out there as well. You've definitely got players like North Korea. North Korea have a very sophisticated cyber attack capability, and a lot of it is used to gain and grow hard currency to prop up that regime. But then you've also got people like Iran, who are big players and responsible for a lot of attacks, and a whole range of other really interesting state-sponsored attackers. We usually call these groups in cybersecurity a term called APT. We call them advanced persistent threats. And there's a whole range of APT actors out there with a whole range of interesting names. And one that springs to mind, I think it's APT 30 or 33, is Ocean Lotus. And that's a group that we know has been targeting, say, the automotive industry, for instance. We know it's a Vietnam state-sponsored attack, and that's in order to prop up some manufacturing of the domestic car industry in Vietnam. One of the unfortunate victims of one of their attacks last year was Toyota globally. So state-sponsored attackers very much out there, very much, I guess, becoming more day-to-day known as well. Ideological hackers, these are the guys that are hacking for a cause. You might remember there was a large group probably about 5 or 6 years ago, would pop up quite regularly, called Anonymous, and they had the masks that they would wear, and they would come up and they would talk about social issues. We would see a lot of these people for either environmental or other social reasons. Sometimes they attack business, sometimes they attack government. So there's definitely a lot of ideological hackers out there. Hackers for hire is another interesting group of people. These are linked to those traditional gangs, but they may be going it on their own, bit of a small business. And these are people whom you can pay to perform a service or perform a hack. And it might be, for instance, a ransomware. It might be that you want someone phished. It might be that you want to dox someone. There's just terms for finding out everyone's personal information and posting it online. It might be that you want to ruin someone's reputation. You can pay someone for hire. Pretty low rates at the moment. For instance, there's a type of a cybersecurity attack called a DDoS attack. That's a distributed denial of service attack. All that's about is it's flooding an application or a website with a number of requests, and that then becomes unavailable, that website or that service. You can buy a fairly decent DDoS attack anywhere from 35 to 60. It wouldn't pay more than $60, and you might see a company either their website or the service become unavailable for a number of hours. The fifth one, which I put a question mark there, that relates to insiders, so insider threats. So There is an increasing, I guess, trend of attacks that are facilitated by what we call trusted insiders. So that's something else to be aware of. What do they want? What are they out there for, these people? Well, when it comes to you guys, definitely the top couple there is, they're after the sensitive data that you hold, that you process, that you may come across, that you may touch. That could be patients, that could be practice information. Secondly, the crims may be after money. So a lot of ransomware attacks are out there to extort money from victims. They may be after banking credentials or other ways or paths that they can get or extract money from people and organisations. They might be after an email address. So why would your email address be a target of cyber criminals? Well, then that email address of yours can then be weaponized, and that can be used to send out either phishing emails or other types of spam emails. They could be out to destroy your reputation. Increasingly, I guess, what you're seeing right across a number of industries, and me and management consulting is probably no different from you guys, is that everyone is now being assessed online for their performance, whether it be Google reviews or hot doc reviews or any other types of online reviews. It seems nearly anyone has carte blanche to say anything they want about you and your professional skills. So there could be a concerted effort to undertake information operations against someone's reputation. And we're seeing a bit of a trend of that on the dark web as well. If one's a bit odd and maybe doesn't really apply unless you're running a large scale, maybe corporate network, is sometimes these people are looking for a virtual hiding place, and that may be then to use your network to skip off to another network, or it could be just to park and run and hide out and wait and see how things go. So that's a little bit about who's out there, what's out there. I'm just going to touch on some of the big trends that are worrying me at the moment when it comes to the overall cyber threat environment. Guys, there's no surprises here. It's about nation state attacks. It's malware without files, which I'll touch on in a minute. And now we're seeing more and more use of bots. Bots are back. Businesses are going down as well. And I put a truck there on purpose. If anyone's used Toll this year, so Toll, the large logistics supplier, you probably had a package delivered by them. Maybe you've had important documents or other things sent by them. They've suffered multiple cybersecurity incidents this year. The first one kind of started early in the year, and that resulted in a ransomware attack that locked their systems and locked their customer-facing portals out for about 2 weeks. Their portal was down, and then they suffered another attack about 2 months ago now, where some sensitive employee data of theirs was stolen from their network. It was pasted on a site in the dark web called Corporate Hacks, and that was released publicly. So a lot more businesses are being targeted when it comes to cybersecurity, and you see more and more of this. And like I touched on in the beginning, COVID-19 has certainly seen an uptick in the targeting of healthcare and the aged care sector in particular, with a lot of companies out there, with a lot of attacks designed to elicit a ransom from medical companies. Spear phishing is on the rise. Phishing in general is on the rise. We've seen huge uptake in phishing emails, particularly targeting medical professionals since the advent of COVID-19. It's interesting. If anyone's interested, I can forward them a report that was done studying the domain names that were registered. And as we started to see the pandemic tick up in December, January, February of this year, we saw a number of COVID-like domains. The registrations for those domains went through the roof. A fascinating exercise in seeing just how quickly these criminal elements can respond and how agile they are in setting up new types of phishing hacks. So you've probably all been the victim of a phishing attack at one time. Spear phishing is simply something that's much more targeted to you in your profession or your situation. And the goal of phishing, I guess, is to deliver malicious software or malware, and that may be either to elicit data or information from your system. It may be to deliver another type of payload. And increasingly, we're seeing these phishing attacks deliver malware that isn't necessarily needing a file to execute. So ordinarily, a lot of malware is executed by you clicking on a file or a link and downloading something. New strains of malware are out now that don't require you to actually click on anything. And there was a large hack of the Australian National University in 2018, 2019. And once again, a fascinating document was published by ANU going into detail about that hack, and they traced it back to a number of spear phishing emails, and they posted them online. And one email in particular looks like an ordinary invitation to a meeting that was sent to someone. Nothing was opened or clicked in the email. All that needed to happen was the person previewed it in the preview pane in Microsoft Outlook, and that was enough for the malicious code to execute within the preview pane, and then for this actor to start a sustained data breach. So in the end, I think it was about 50 to 60,000 personal records of ANU students and staff was leaked by this actor over a number of months. A fascinating breach and campaign. Something I'm seeing a lot more of is compliance costs are stinging. And what do I mean by that? So, we've had for a while now the mandatory data breach notification rules, and that comes out of the OAIC. That's the National Privacy Commissioner. I just managed to check the most recent statistics for the period January to June 2020. And the top industry sector by notifications. So these are the number of notifiable data breach reports that the Privacy Commission has received. Healthcare has eclipsed, health service providers has eclipsed the finance industry at 115 reports of major data breaches to the Privacy Commissioner in the first 6 months of this year. So what you've seen, I think, very deliberately over the last couple of years from governments on both sides is a lot more regulation of industries when it comes to cybersecurity. So in the financial services industry, for instance, we have a very comprehensive standard called CPS 234. That's a prudential standard by the financial regulator. And I think what you'll see moving forward in other areas of the economy, including health service, is a lot more government and oversight when it comes to cybersecurity regulation, including things like minimum baselines, minimum standards, staff training, that kind of thing. Like I said at the start, there's going to be a lot of collateral damage this year, guys, and that comes from nation states who are starting to attack and target individuals. In June this year, kind of in the middle of the pandemic, we all thought it was a little bit odd when the Prime Minister and Minister for Defence came out and said that there was a major campaign going on by a foreign or state actor. No surprises who that might be. And that this was impacting a range of Australian businesses. And that was what we call a copy and paste compromise campaign, a very successful campaign by this actor to target people right across the economy, businesses, small, medium and large. That's kind of what the cybersecurity threat environment looks like in 2020. All right, everyone, I'm going to now take you for a little bit of a peek into the dark web. We're going to have a look at pull the curtain back and have a look. We're not going to see anything too confronting, I promise you. And we'll understand this area of the internet that kind of lurks beneath the surface, where a lot of these cyber criminal groups operate. We'll understand what some of the markets look like, how they trade goods, and what that means for you. So what is this dark web? First of all, if I had to picture what the internet looks like, I'll draw you a picture of the internet. What you've got here is this iceberg, guys, and this is what the internet looks like. Now, I'm not too sure on the percentages, but at the top there, at the top of the iceberg, that's what we call the surface internet. So that's everything that you can access straight away from a browser or your phone, things like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Maybe you got TikTok, maybe you don't. Maybe your kids have got it. That represents probably about 4%. I think it's a little bit more of the internet. 4% is the surface internet. Underneath that, you've got the bulk of the internet. And the bulk of the internet is things that are on there that may be behind some type of credential wall or some type of identity service. So simply what that means is it could be financial records. So it could be your bank, it could be your work logons, it could be, Office 365, for example, is one of these. It could be your email client, just something where you need to prove who you are before you go on it. And then the remaining piece of the internet, the dark bit of the iceberg there underneath, is used for more nefarious purposes. So you have the Tor network or the Onion network, which we'll be taking a look at tonight. And it's used to facilitate primarily the trade in illicit information, so fraudulent information. There's a lot of drugs on there as well, guys, and a lot of other illegal and illicit information. I should say at this point, though, the dark web or the Tor browsers, it can have some good as well. So like everything, there's good and bad. And, you know, the good that you've seen is it can be a way for people to communicate, for instance, using the Tor network, which provides a level of anonymity if they're living under repressive governments. It could be a way for them to speak to journalists. It could be a way to organise. So there are some good elements of this, but like I said, predominantly it is used for some of those bad or nefarious purposes. This will give you another quick, I guess, bird's eye view though of the traffic and the requests. The clear web, there's a lot of popular websites always attracting link counts in the millions or more. So people accessing websites and services. The dark web is much more confined. The most popular market there only has about 3,500 inbound links going out all the time, as opposed to millions of links to different websites on the clear web. And then at the very top tier, or the top 8 onion sites, you're only seeing more and more. So condensed. So I guess the point here is there's not as many people who are on the dark web as there are on the clear web, which you'd hope so. Now, to access the dark web, this is a question I get quite a bit. How do I access it? Well, you do require specific software and configurations. Includes the Tor network. The Tor was a free piece of software. It was really originally developed by the US military, as a lot of technological innovations are. And the network consists of onion domains, connections between them in the form of direct links. It's called the onion because there's a number of layers, and I'll show you why in a minute what some of those layers look like. Thought it'd be interesting just to have a little bit of an exploration of just going a little bit deeper into the dark web. When someone says the dark web, what does it mean? There's a strata, 3 main stratas there. One is you've got these lower tier underground forums. These are usually free and open access, so for novices. Then you've got higher tier dark web forums. These are much more restricted, always hosted on a Tor network. And there's other requirements to join some of these forums. And it might be, you may need to prove your bona fides in certain criminal activities. You may need to go through a period of vetting to make sure that you're not law enforcement. And then we have a look at the third layer is the dark web markets, which function much like an ordinary marketplace, like you'd expect, where you find the listing of illicit services and goods and stolen credentials. I should say, guys, that at this point, English isn't the most popular language on the dark web. You can probably take a guess at the 2 languages that are the most popular on the dark web, and it's not English. How do you pay for these goods and services? If you have a market, if you have criminal activity, you need a way to pay for it. Cryptocurrency is the only way to pay on a lot of these networks. Why? Well, it's an anonymous way for me to pay you and to trade value. Bitcoin, you probably heard of Bitcoin. It's very popular. But with that popularity comes costs, transaction costs, and other costs. So there's a lot of other ones out there as well, Litecoin, Monero, and Dash. I even saw a dark web market that's trying to start its own cryptocurrency as well. At the beginning of the presentation, guys, I did touch a little bit on a traditional cyber gang. So I wanted to just take a couple of seconds to drill down and just show you what this might look like in the context of a traditional cyber gang that's operating a dark web market. At the top, you've got the mastermind or the boss, like any organization. And they may have a range of diversified and legitimate investments and other things that they do in the real world. Beneath them, much like many companies, you've got project managers, ex-law enforcement agents. Good to know there's a job for us after all. Under those project managers, you have forgers, people who are hackers, software engineers and intermediaries, and then serving the intermediaries are troopers. And sometimes these troopers are used to as money mules or to get money out of certain bank accounts or whatnot. That's what a traditional cyber gang looks like. Some of the forums or some of the markets online, we estimate will employ anywhere between 40 and 60 full-time people. That's to ensure the market keeps running, to ensure customer service, all that kind of thing. Here we are. This is a screenshot from me on the dark web. I'm on an Onion browser, Tor browser there. This is not one of my favorite markets. I must say this is Monopoly. This one predominantly deals in illicit drugs. Won't spend too much time on that one. It is interesting though, guys. This gives you a snapshot of how the Tor or the dark web operates. This is the circuit that I used to connect to that web. what you see there is layers, and those layers are providing the anonymous nature of the Tor network. And you can see some are unnamed, some are in the United States, some are in Austria, Bulgaria. That shows you that you're often looking at 8 to 9 hops to get to this website. Much more, I guess, slower than the traditional web, because you're going through a lot more hops there to get to these websites. Guys, this is another one. This is called the White House market. And I should say these markets on the dark web, particularly the English-speaking markets, they change a lot. They go offline. There's a lot of scams. In this one, we won't stay too long. Predominantly, you can see the things that are for sale here. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of illicit drugs there. That's the top vendors there. A lot of online business for sale. I'm going to touch on some of that fraud, some software, some of those services I mentioned before. So if you want to go and buy someone a ransomware, if you want to go and buy a DDoS attack on someone, or if you want to try and hinder someone's reputation, you click on services there. And there's also the standard fraud things like forgeries, identity documents, those type of things. So this is a example one from the White House market. This is for an ANZ bank logon. There's a minimum of $5,000 in this account. This is from a vendor, Telstra. You can see the vendor there, Telstra. Mostly good reviews, 30 reviews. So I should say a lot of these markets will use the traditional things that you'd see on things like eBay and other markets to rate people. I should say as well, not to go too far into these type of markets, but Empire Market, which was my favourite dark web market, went down permanently in about August 20, but they've imported the feedback from some of these other markets for this seller. And this seller has mostly good feedback from Empire Market. Like I said, this is an ANZ bank account. There's some detailed instructions that this might then allow you to bypass some of the bank's protections. Don't worry, this guy does. He ships it out fast, usually under 12 hours. And look, there's various things you can do with it. Apparently, you can pay through BPay. Use your imaginations. Some of the people, when you buy some of these goods and services, I should say, they'll provide detailed instructions. Not this guy, and he also has strictly no refunds and no replacement policy. I should say as well, guys, this is an example of Sniffed Australia CVV CC. That's credit card. CVV is card verification number at the back of the credit card. So this seller he's selling Australian credit cards there. They're in stock. 44 reviews, all good. So he deals exclusively in Australian-based credit cards. So ordinarily, when you buy one of the credit cards, you have a period of time as well to check the credit card hasn't been cancelled by the person's bank, and then you can go and facilitate credit card fraud. So if you've ever had an incident where maybe you've received fraudulent charge on your credit card, it may have come from a market like this, and this is what it looks like when someone orders that information. We will leave it there when it comes to the dark web. We could have explored a little bit more, but I thought we were just going to take a peek behind the curtain. So what you can see there is it is predominantly like a version of eBay or Amazon where goods are traded and sold. And I think the important thing to remember, there's a whole range of goods and services that can be sold, as well as a whole range of information that's available. Often, for example, with some of these credit cards, what's provided as well is called fulls. And fulls just means that when you purchase the credit card, you'll also receive the full name of the person who owns the credit card, their address, their date of birth, perhaps any other relevant information as well. And that will just help you facilitate fraudulent activity if you need to prove you are the owner of the credit card. So what does all this mean for you guys? What are some of the trends that I'm seeing? A recent report that came out from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, the AFP and the Australian Signals Directorate told me that cyber attacks against healthcare are not only increasing, but they're accounting for about 1 in 10 of all the attacks in Australia. And that's quite big. That outranks other sectors like retail at the moment, I should say. We're seeing this trend because other sectors like financial services, like retail, they're becoming harder targets. And I guess that's important in the context because a lot of the time I hear from a whole range of people and companies is I don't need to worry about this, Daniel. I'm too small to be a target. Why would anyone come after me? I'm just running, might be running a small medical practice, or I could be running my own business. Why am I a target? And my response is always the same, is that you are absolutely a target. Cyber criminals operate like electricity in that they will find the path of least resistance. And that may be people with the least amount to spend on these type of protections. When I worked at the Commonwealth Bank, there was about 700 of us that worked in cybersecurity for the bank out of our total workforce of 60,000, and the bank would spend anywhere between $500 and $1 million upwards to $750 million a year protecting itself, because as we push people towards digitization, I don't know when the last time anyone went into a bank branch was, central to that, I guess, value proposition with customers is trust and confidence. And you're seeing it now in medicine. You're seeing people push towards digital solutions, and central to that will be trust and confidence in securing their data. What attacks then do I predominantly see against the healthcare sector? Well, the big one is ransomware. That's the kicker. Data breaches is the next one, either exfiltrating data to embarrass people or to seek or elicit payment, or just for the sake of breaching data. DDoS attacks, as I mentioned before, explain what a DDoS attack was, how it can impact you and your business or your ability to provide services. And we're seeing increasingly more and more, probably in larger healthcare organisations, whether it be in pharmaceutical companies or people providing other types of services, is the insider threat. So a good example of this recently, for example, in Tesla, where an employee was approached by some people, by some Russians, to undertake some data exfiltration. He played along, got the FBI involved. We had a number of arrests recently, which was a good outcome. And then this other one, which we're going to touch on a little bit, is what we call BEC fraud, or traditional fraud scams. So all BEC means is business email compromise. And all that means is it's using the compromise of an email chain, using the compromise of email as a technology to facilitate old scale fraud. Now, an example of this that I saw with one of my insurance clients was, for instance, a rather junior insurance assessor clicked on a phishing email and she input her login credentials to the phishing email. From that, the cyber criminals were able to remotely log in to email, and they set an auto fraud rule. So this person was working for an insurance company, seeing a lot of claims. The insurance company lost about 3,500 emails. And how did they use this? What was the purpose of capturing these emails? Well, what the cyber criminals would do is, if they saw a payment go out or an email to settle a claim, they would insert themselves in the payment process or the chain and say, oh, there's actually new details or new bank details that have come to light. You need to actually pay here instead of here. And that was a way for them to quickly redirect money. BEC, business email compromise, CEO email fraud, it's a very lucrative fraud type. I would see a lot of it at the bank. The largest amount of money I saw lost was about $22 million for this type of fraud. And once again, it's high reward and low risk. Often it's very difficult to track down who's behind that scheme. And this particularly is very successful, and it targets administrative people, it targets practice managers, it targets anyone who's able to control payments for you or on behalf of your organisation through a range of increasingly sophisticated, I guess, phishing attacks and other attacks. A good example of just how sophisticated it is, there was a German resource company, and they had their payment centre in London, and the scammers used some deep fake technology to impersonate the CEO's voice, and he called up the payments office in London, and then facilitated, I think it was a couple €100,000 that were paid out because people had managed to impersonate the CEO's voice. So that tells you the level of research that's put into some of these scams as well. Guys, which leads me to talk to you tonight a little bit about ransomware. Typically, ransomware is going to enter a system through phishing emails, perhaps by someone clicking on a malicious link or someone viewing an advertisement containing malware. We call that malvertising. There was an alert put out last month by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre for a new type of ransomware called Maze that's particularly targeting the Australian health sector. Ransomware isn't going away. It's been here for a while. I'm seeing a big uptick in a lot of it. And there's an interesting debate going on at the moment about whether to pay, whether not to pay. Some companies are paying and they are getting access to their data back quickly. Other companies are not paying and they're not seeing that data again, and it's taking them longer to recover. It's a very tricky issue, ransomware. Like I said earlier, one of the really good protections is to make sure you have a lot of robust backups in place, and that you also use something called MFA, or multi-factor authentication, which I'll touch on in a minute. But ransomware is going to increasingly be a problem, and I think it's going to increasingly target a lot of these systems that we see around the place that you will need to function. So definitely one to look out for. I should mention, not all ransomware is simply there to encrypt data and then to seek a payment, and the data will be decrypted. Sometimes, particularly some recent strains, are there simply to corrupt the data, and you never manage to get it back. So that was a little bit of a touch on ransomware and what it looks like. There's 3 Ps I mentioned earlier. How can you protect yourself from all this stuff? There's a lot of ransomware out there. There's phishing emails all the way. What are the 3 Ps I need to worry about? Well, unfortunately, guys, the first one is passwords. Look, they're here to stay. I know they're difficult. There was a good study that came out of the UK a couple of years ago now that said all of us need to remember about 35 to 50 individual passwords, different and unique passwords from a range of online services, everything from online banking to our work email logins, to our other email logins, to services, to apps that we use daily. It's really hard to remember all those passwords, but the advice hasn't been changing. So, partly I hope to see an end to passwords. That would be my long-term dream through biometrics, but we'll see. Until then, it is important to have long and strong passwords. Don't use things that can be easily guessed. Passphrases are a good idea as well. What's a passphrase? Well, it's simply a long string of words that make sense to you. And the longer the password, the harder it is to be guessed. Some practical advice, guys, is use a password manager. There's some really good ones out there. Nothing in cyber, there's no absolutes, so nothing is perfectly secure, or nothing is without the potential to be compromised. But I will say there's some good password managers out there. I use one, and what that does do, it allows me to have a really strong password for the password manager, and that automatically handles all my other passwords. The good ones will function across a number of devices as well, so they'll appear on your phones and whatnot too. Turn on multi-factor authentication. So I cannot stress enough how important it is to use multi-factor authentication when it comes to a whole range of online services. Really important in that a story I told you about the insurer with the compromised insurance assessor who had her email compromised. If that organisation had turned on multi-factor authentication, all that means is MFAs, you might receive a text message or another way you log on to prove your identity when you're logging onto an application or a service. It's a really important protection that can stop a lot of attacks in their tracks. I want to touch on a P, which is phishing, and the ability to identify phishing emails, guys, really quickly. I'm running out of time, but this is what we call a standard phishing email. You probably all received one of these. You can have a look. It purports to be from Google Docs. But you can tell immediately from the email address that's not a Google Docs email address, so that's immediately dodgy. This one here is a little bit what we call spear phishing, and spear phishing simply means that some context has been applied to send it to you. So this one's been sent from LogMeIn, and LogMeIn is just an SSO type service, and this person may know that you use the LogMeIn as a service, and this is them trying to get you to click on this. So you can see, yeah, it looks like a fairly legitimate kind of email address, no reply at ssl-logmein.com, which might be legitimate if you use the LogMeIn service. But then if you hover over the link there, even though the link's been spelled out, it's completely different. You can see it's another address there. It's self.jp, which is completely different to what you'd expect that link to be. So that's the spear phishing email. And then this is an example, guys, of what we call whaling, or the CEO email fraud that I touched on a little bit before, which is Michael, are you in the office? Steve's the boss. Yes, if you want to call. Michael's the financial controller. Steve doesn't call but says, I need you to process a wire for an invoice. What details would you need to process the payment? That's the beginning of the chain when it comes to CEO email fraud. Obviously, Mike hasn't checked to see that it is actually Steve's real email address because it's from a pretty dodgy looking Comcast account. That's how quickly that can happen, that CEO email fraud. Spear phishing, that last one was called whaling, was the term we use in cybersecurity. The golden rule, guys, when it comes to emails really is if you don't expect it, you have to suspect it. Be skeptical of all the emails you receive, particularly those. And for a long time, we've tried to give people practical tips, things like watch for dodgy spelling or punctuation. But a couple of years ago, I was seeing a lot of advertisements on the dark web for copywriters. So they quickly got onto that. So you've got to be skeptical as a baseline. Be aware of your online presence. So what do I mean by that? Well, some of the spear phishing or the particularly targeted phishing attacks we see are tailored, and it might know, for instance, if you're posting on your LinkedIn or if you're posting on your Facebook or other social media accounts that you're going away to XYZ, that can then be used and weaponized as part of a phishing attack. So just be aware of what you're posting and to who. And we have a whole other range where we talk about privacy settings and whatnot. Inspect the link first of all. If the link is even a little bit dodgy, don't click it. Please don't click it. And then be smart with your passwords. What I mean by that is if you get an email that purports to be from your bank, from your health service, that asks you to put in credentials, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a phishing email and it's going to lead you astray. So absolutely don't do it. Another really important protection is to keep your software updated, particularly if you've got a practice manager or someone, an admin, make sure they're applying all the recent patches to Windows. That helps us get around some of the technologies or the malicious software. So updating software is really important. Guys, the last P I'm going to talk about is being prepared and being ready for when a cyber attack occurs. All the organisations I've dealt with, the ones that have a plan in place, the ones that have practiced that plan and know what to do, they respond quicker, they're able to gain the trust and confidence of their customers or patients a lot easier, and they're able to ensure that their losses are minimised. The first part of being prepared is really understanding what data you hold, where you hold it, how long you've been holding it for, and what that looks like, and just who's responsible for it. So I do see a lot of people saying, oh, I'm using a cloud-based service now. A cloud computing service just means a computer in another location. It doesn't mean that you've managed to transfer or mitigate a lot of the risks associated. Make sure there's training for people who are on the front line, who are dealing with patients, who are talking to your clients. They need to undergo regular phishing simulations as well. They need to be given the skills, tools, and knowledge to help them navigate what's going to be an increasingly difficult cyber landscape for these guys. Have a cyber response plan. It doesn't matter how small your business are. I'm currently working in a company called Resilience by Design. We have them in a box for you. We have them ready to go. They will teach you and tell you what you need to know and what to do in the critical first couple of hours. If you haven't done it as part of your broader medical indemnity insurance, I know people like Avant, for instance, offer cyber insurance practices. Could be a good option. It could be cost effective, but the price of that insurance will depend on how prepared you are and what plans and whatnot you have in place. And like I said before, running those phishing simulations, it's really important to your people, and it helps them to prepare and to get out there and be confident. And it isn't something that you do once a year. I know we all do a lot of training at work. I know we all do a lot of simulations. I know you guys do a lot of training. You do a lot of simulations. It can often feel like a click and forget or a tick box type thing. That's how can't be how it is with phishing. Emails become such a ingrained part of our life now that we really need to develop and work on our second sense at guessing a phishing email, much like exercise and a muscle, and exercising it regularly will help us. The other thing to do, a lot of people who work in the medical industry are what we call whales when it comes to targets and cybersecurity. That simply means you got a lot of money and we want it. So something else you could think about there is credit monitoring for yourself that would allow you to receive an alert. Perhaps things are being opened in your name or stuff is happening. Credit monitoring on yourself. I mean, there's a number of companies I could provide you advice on when it comes to that. So, what do we do? I've spoken now on all the risks and stuff, and this will be on the website as well, guys. But when it comes to resilience by design. We help you cut through some of the digital noise there. We work right across the continuum when it comes to cybersecurity. So we also do cyber safety training. That's for teachers, kids, and parents. We can help you with reputation and compliance, and critical incident response planning as well is what we do. So that's us, guys. That's a little bit about cybersecurity and surgeons. So I'd love to take your questions.
Well, Daniel, can you hear me?
Mm.
Yep. Look, thank you for that. That was fantastic. Sorry, I should have started my video. We do have a few questions, and I've got a couple myself if we don't get more from the audience. But Angus has asked, is a Linux operating system, or I suppose any operating system, safer than others than a standard Windows operating system?
Yeah, it's a good question there, and I think it really depends on what you're using the operating system for and how au fait you are with it. I mean, Linux is often used by a lot of us in the industry to do a whole range of things, and there's pros and cons to it. Like there's pros and cons to Windows, and there's pros and cons to iOS as well. So I'd say it really depends on what you're using it for and what the context it's being used in, really. So it's a good question, and without further information, sorry, I can't give you a more complete answer.
Okay. It's also been asked that I'm not a big Facebook user myself, but can you comment on questionnaires doing rounds at the moment on Facebook where you're asked a list of questions such as favourite colour, name of first pet, etc., which looks innocent enough, but might mean giving out personal details that you shouldn't?
Yeah, and look, it definitely smells fishy to me.
Yep.
A lot of those questions or the surveys is often used in the password reset process. So it might be used as a challenge to prove your identity. So that could be being used, that information could be hoovered up and it could be attached to your profile and then on-sold to you, and some of that further information is that, yes, I'm Daniel and my favorite color is green and I'm come from this city, and that can all be used in the password reset context. So unless you know exactly where it's coming from or what the purpose of, I'd probably steer clear of those sort of things as well.
Okay. I've got a question or two as well. You did touch on this, but I mean, how much more reliable is a cloud-based software delivery of an electronic medical record going to be than running your own server in your own office? I know there's going to be pros and cons to each of this, but I know some people have said, well, they're running the cloud, so it's their responsibility, which is all very good and well, but as a practitioner, you're the one left holding the can potentially at the end of the day, no matter who's responsible for managing the software.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I think it's an ongoing challenge, and I see it all the time, and we've been dealing with it in financial services for a long time. And I think ultimately the buck stops with you, even though you may be having someone else run that server for you or operate that cloud server. And I think that does provide you with a level of protection, or it provides you with a way to attest that you took reasonable steps to protect the data, and that you maybe use a reputable cloud service provider. And we all know the big ones that are out there, whether you're running AWS or Google or Azure or anyone that's out there. So I think if you can go behind that, you can say, yep, that was me. And I think it becomes a lot easier if you're running your own server. There's a lot of dangers, and there's a lot you need to stay on top of there as well when it comes to ensuring updates in place, vulnerability scanning. A lot of that's automated at the cloud level, but I think there's no perfect solution. And I just look back at for instance, there's a large bank in the US called Capital One, and they'd migrated a lot of their data to AWS, so to Amazon. And unfortunately, one of their buckets was made public. One of their buckets of data was made public that contained about 1 million records of customers who had applied for credit cards. So you remember, there's a lot of information, sensitive information on credit card applications. And that was done to an AWS employee. she's been arrested and she had some mental problems, but she posted all that onto Pastebin or GitHub, one of those. So even if you do everything right, like Capital One had done, they've still been fined, as I understand it, by the regulator in the US. So there's things that you can put in place there, I guess, when it comes to cloud computing, but there's no perfect solution. But I completely understand why people move to it, and it's neat. And most of the big players will have a base level of protection in place, and there's different levels of cloud security certifications that you can look into to get some advice on.
Next question. Well, how can we ensure that we are HIPAA compliant?
It's a good one. And look, HIPAA is one of those standards, I guess, that's out there, and it doesn't matter really what standard you look at, and whether you deal with, there's another one called the NIST CSF, that's another framework, NIST Cybersecurity Framework. There's this, the SANS CIS Top 20 controls. In Australia, the AST is what we call the Essential 8, and then you've got HIPAA, which comes out of the US for healthcare providers. Look, you really need someone to come in and have a look at your network and to do an audit there and to make sure that you're HIPAA compliant. If you're using one of the big cloud service providers, and most of them will be HIPAA, I guess, ready or HIPAA certified, but it's one of those things, no matter what industry, in HIPAA, PCI DSS, if you're collecting payments, that's the payment card industry data security standard. All of them will have a level of, I guess, base security controls that you need to tick off, but it would be seeking external help there to make sure that you're HIPAA compliant.
Okay. Well, I think we've probably got time for just one more question, and then we'll be at our 8 o'clock time zone level. How safe are password generators and managers that automatically install? So, Apple Keychain and Google Chrome, etc., in terms of creating and managing and also recording your passwords. And do you run the risk of forgetting your passwords if you become reliant on the computer remembering for you?
Yeah, you absolutely do. And I think that's a situation, David, that I find myself in, that I couldn't tell you a single password of mine anymore. And like I said, passwords are one of those really tricky things. So if you want to use the Apple one, Apple Key, or the Google Chrome one as well, there's absolute pros to it. And in my opinion, I think the pros outweigh the cons in that it will generate for you long and strong passwords for each of the individual applications or services that you use them for. But I think the trick is just understanding what some of the security around what that looks like. So for instance, the Chrome version, anyone that has access to your computer can log on and download a CSV file or an Excel file of your Chrome passwords that it's stored for you on that device. So ensuring access control of your computer is really important in that context. And if you don't want that to be shared, if you want them to move across devices, so you might have a number of platforms, you might have an iPad as well as a phone, as well as a computer. I suppose something like LastPass or OnePass, I think, come into their own, so they can be multi-platform, and they can protect the passwords across a number of different platforms.
Okay. Well, look, Daniel, thank you. That was fascinating. It's now 8 o'clock and we haven't got any more questions coming through. This talk will be recorded and available on the College of Surgeons website. So, look, Daniel, I very much appreciate your time, and the College of Surgeons does as well, and I'm sure all the participants do have learned something tonight. So thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Okay.